Good morning, everyone, and thank you for dialing in and joining us today. This is Bill Bergstrom and Steve Griffin from ThinkWise. For the sake of introductions, I'm Steve Griffin, kind of a product advocate here at ThinkWise. Bill Bergstrom, president of ThinkWise, and I'll let Bill introduce himself in just 2 seconds. Just real quick, everyone, just to let you know, we do have folks on mute. That way you can allow your dogs to bark, and that's fine. But also, there's a chat room associated with Zoom as you dial in. Feel free to use that throughout the time this morning, whether it's questions or comments. And then towards the end, we're going to hold answering some of those questions, and we'll pick a few out when we have time. Bill, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Bill Bergstrom here with ThinkWise, President and COO. Thank you very much for logging on to today's webinar. Excited to talk about talent-based culture and hopefully provide some great takeaway here. So before we get going, anything else we need to clean up on housekeeping, Steve?
No, I think between the questions that we're going to answer towards the end, everyone's on mute. I think we're actually in very good shape, though.
Okay. All right. We will certainly be providing the slides for those that stay with us for the duration of today's presentation. So rest assured that that'll happen. And again, as you follow along, hopefully some great information to share. So. A quick start here, a quick word about ThinkWise. Certainly the important takeaway from this slide is our mission. And what we're real interested in doing is providing folks with the data and the process to drive better leadership decisions through data. At our core, we're an assessment organization that uses, scientifically valid and business-focused assessments that lead to great leadership development opportunities, team development opportunities, right, and smarter hiring, and so on and so forth. So we've been doing that for a long time, since '07, and today you'll see a lot of commentary based on that time that we've been gathering data. A quick, why should we be talking about talent development? Because at the core, right, people are and always will be your organization's greatest differentiator and secret weapon, right? Your people or your talent base, drive innovation, and innovation drives your organizational excellence. So, today's topic is especially important as we'll look at, the connection between culture, the connection between an organization that really embraces a true talent development strategy, and how those things feed into an organization that embraces excellence. So we'll explore that talent-based culture. We'll look at it really by focusing on talent development, kind of explore some current state. We'll, of course, look at value and then really dive into some proper process. So before we do that, what we'll do on this next slide is we'll take just a little lighthearted look at the history of talent development. So everybody sees kind of America's favorite corporate punching bag there with Michael Scott, Steve Carell, whatever you choose to use his real name or his, stage name. Maybe in your own organization, you've pointed to this guy as an example of what not to do. You owe it to yourself to binge watch this on Netflix if you haven't watched much of The Office. But really what we want to focus on with our buddy here, Michael Scott, is the Peter Principle. Right? So some of you on the line may be familiar with the Peter Principle. And as we put it in context of the history of talent development, way back in 1969, Lawrence J. Peter coined this Peter Principle. And it was this whole idea that managers rise to their level of incompetence, right? That basically talent development, succession planning, talent mobility, all these critical components of a dynamic and successful organization were based basically on a person's success at their current position, not on their ability to excel as they move up and through an organization, right? So what you end up with is an organization where all the leadership positions are filled with people that have run out of talent, right? So, the reason why we kind of say it's a lighthearted look is there's a lot of folks that said, Lawrence Peters did this kind of commentary tongue-in-cheek. Others are saying they call it ubiquitous observation, right? But either way, however you choose to embrace this idea of managers rising to their levels of incompetence, the result is that, kind of illustrated by another look at an iconic workplace humor provider, and Dilbert, that work is actually done by those that have not reached their level of incompetence, right? So in our tongue-in-cheek look, the Peter Principle does, if you embrace it and you look at it in your own organization, it does generate some results that are not real attractive, right? Inefficiencies, frustration, leadership resentment, low morale. But most importantly, it can lead to missed potential as the organization, right? When you don't have a process that's identifying great talent and putting them in a position to succeed, you're missing the potential of the organization. So, a quick look at the history of talent development in light of the Peter Principle. Hopefully that's kind of funny. Hopefully there's not much of it going on in your organization. But Steve, what's evolved really in top organizations to battle the Peter Principle?
And just a quick comment too, Bill, from what you had talked about through those comic strips and Steve Carell's, I'll call him. And, it's really, I don't believe people are cognitively, mentally, or intellectually deficient or inefficient when they move on to a new role. If you were smart today, you're still smart tomorrow, really is the point. The comic story about the lemur, I think, is important to really focus in on for just a couple of seconds. And I think it has to do with, again, not being a bad problem solver suddenly.
Right.
I think it has to do with a lack of bravery to change.
Yep.
Right? And just having that confidence to step out of your comfort zone and realizing I need to put the hammer away.
Right.
And bring out a new tool.
Right.
And I may fumble with that new tool because I'm used to having a hammer in my hand.
Right.
And people are watching me now, and nerves come into play, and then you see that lack of bravery come through.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, and some of the, if you really dive into the Peter Principle, yeah, you're exactly right. It's that people fail, not necessarily because they're incompetent people. It's just that their skills don't necessarily match with their role, and that's a critical component of making sure the Peter Principle doesn't exist within your organization, right, and offering up those strategies to prevent it.
Yeah. Preparation's key, I suppose, right? So here, what we're looking at is talent development today and what's evolved in top organizations to battle the Peter Principle, Bill. So, for instance, smart organizations, they intentionally build and design their business, their process, and actions with people in mind, with talent. All right, and that's really a key underlying statement with having talent in mind, because it's really the focus for today. So organizations define success through critical talent development and management processes. So to be clear, we're really talking about values, expectations of performance, which is just a bungle of a mess in almost every organization. A well-defined mission and vision statement that actually moves people towards what success looks like. In other words, I need to know what the mission, vision, values, or what we call the MVVs, really are at a level to where I know what I need to do to help drive the mission, vision, and values. Because for the most part, more than tongue-in-cheek anymore, Bill, it's actually just a bad joke. You can walk into any major business with plaques on the wall and read them and know that they're just so abstract that a painter would get it wrong. Right. They're just really, really bad and poorly implemented, to the point that not only does no one get it wrong, no one gets it right either. Right. So really, what are we really talking about today? And that's competencies. So it's a set of behaviors that are about knowledge, skills, and abilities. And most people stick with just those three. But I would actually add on top of knowledge, skills, and abilities, actions and attitudes. And I think attitudes are key, and that's where things like confidence comes in. Right, with the Peter Principle and bravery. If I don't have the attitude that I'm willing to put my hammer away and try, right, and then have that let me just try this out kind of attitude and go for it, I fail. And everyone will let me do it like a lemming.
Yep.
Right, so here in our next side, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into talent development today. So we're looking at today's top organizations who truly recognize what we would say people are assets. And, that's easy to say. We'll say it a lot.
Yeah.
But it's a bit harder to do. And that's about really what today's slides are concerning. So it's important to be very, very clear that people are assets, and let's not be afraid to not only say that, but embrace what that means. And that's we as people provide value to business, to process, to consumers, and to our fellow staff, right? So how your business performs or executes on strategy is intimately tied to your talent efforts, your talent development. And when those two strategies of business and people don't align, you are just going to see failure everywhere. And your business starts to plummet, and you're going to see very bad results. If anything, this is what a CFO's nightmare is, right? Everything's going south, and why? Well, let's look at the people and how it's misaligned to strategy. Something to think about, though, is HR does not manage the organizational staff, right? So the entire management team manages the staff, and they implement talent. So that's something that's pretty important to really think about. HR is not responsible for hiring, for example, right? They may be responsible for spearheading, headhunting and sourcing talent and all of that, but it's leadership that's responsible for hiring. So, Bill?
Well, I just was going to say you highlight a few things that are really going to come to life. Again, you mentioned the point of today's webinar. You highlight a few things that we'll really drill down to. For example, hiring, right?
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about the role of recruiting, for example, in a talent management strategy that's actually driving results, right? Because they have to be able to make sure their function is tied, like you're saying, to that mission, vision, and value, and they understand that, and actions and competencies are all rolling up to it given that particular
Correct. That's right.
So a lot more coming to help, kind of take that slide to the next level. And data is always important, right? And today's, organizations also, recognize that there's a direct link between investing in talent development and talent management and building a top culture. Mm-hmm. So here at ThinkWise, we're big fans of Josh Bersin. If you don't follow him, say on LinkedIn or in those types of environments, please do. Really a progressive thinker in regards to just kind of the human capital management marketplace in general. And we wanted to provide, again, early some context surrounding, what we're talking about today. And there are a couple of key bullet points there at the top. So most every year, Josh Bersin and his group, Bersin by Deloitte, does the Global Human Capital Trends Report. It's a long but incredibly valuable report, and these two top bullet points are from that report, where they ask the 10 important trends impacting organizations. All kinds of things, as you can imagine, come up there: engagement, learning, organizational design, actually, believe it or not, was number 1. But number 2 and number 3 are highlighted here in the top 2 bullet points. And actually, we started with number 3, where 82% of those survey respondents believe that culture is an important competitive advantage. All right, so hold on to that for a second and then look at bullet point number 2, where the same study said leadership concerns were rated above culture as a potential competitive advantage. So for the value of today, looking at culture as a differentiator when daily actions effectively reflect and promote company values, kind of regardless of role and responsibility, it's interesting to juxtapose that leadership data point. We're going to dive into those questions here in a second, because what that 82% are saying is that they're recognizing that culture drives people's behavior, innovation, and things like customer service, right? So there's this link between how leadership plays a role in that and how culture ultimately drives action is a really important part of the talent management and talent development, strategy as a whole.
Yeah.
Thoughts there? Yeah. There's some neat stuff here, guys, to think about.
Yeah, and the comment that I have is I was trying to really rationalize the first 2 bullets of how they can coexist in the same survey.
Right.
And one of the things I took note of is I'm wondering if leadership is not necessarily the problem, but a symptom of a bigger problem.
Right.
So the leadership is just again, not the problem per se, but it's a symptom of other things that are happening in culture. And maybe that's where number 3 at the bottom comes into play. Is it culture determining who leaders need to be? And what the C-suite's not doing or reading the tea leaves, quote unquote, people. Right. As they're chewing apart ineffective leaders, is it the C-suite throwing their hands up going, we have no one in the pipeline? And should the communication be, hey, company-wide staff, who is it that we need to be elevating? Because sometimes organizations get so large, communication is the worst competency that they're going to have. Right. They're just terrible at a two-way street, simply because they're not listening up and they're forcing their way down on communication.
Right. Which again highlights that question in bullet point 2. All right, we have point that pipeline issues are damaging culture, right? And you could say, sure, they are. I mean, the answer to a closed-ended question like that could easily be yes, especially if you believe there's a component of the feeder principle that still exists within an organization, right? And especially if that's something that there's again, as you guys here and on today's webinar, look at your own organizations. If there's a component of that, ask yourself these 3 questions that are here on this slide, and be willing to open up that conversation within your organization, right? Because the answers might be a challenge to hear, but can really set forth and set the course for a good, strong talent development strategy, right? And the value behind that. So if we go to the next slide, we'll say, okay, well, let's move into kind of the basics of talent development. So, if smart organizations are intentionally designing their business processes and their actions with talent in mind, right? Think of what we talked about on the previous slide. They're using progressive talent development processes to drive culture and differentiation. So what are the basics of talent development, and what factors do organizations need to consider? Now, on the next slide, Steve will look at some of the factors, and they're really neat. But let's quickly define and look at what some of the basics of talent development are, right? So the very first point is competency-based hiring, and this is this idea you talk about, knowledge, skills, and abilities, but you also, you want to hire for fit within the organization and understand what competencies are going to be important for driving the future success of the organization. You need to ask about those. You need to embrace the opportunity to use assessment tools, for example, to help highlight that and really create a great process for competency-based hiring. Performance feedback, the expectation in today's workplace, we're going to highlight that a few more times as we go through this idea that performance feedback is really a critical component of how you're highlighting the path for development of all levels of talent within your organization. Understanding potential, again, getting at a clear picture of the talent pool, regardless of current role and responsibility within the organization, is a critical basic of a proper talent development strategy. Career pathing, right? If we're going to understand that talent pool as career pathing is how, of course, can we match up the processes and the opportunities that exist within our own organization to inspire that continued talent strategy and that development process. So those leaders that may exist in hidden, for that matter, blind spots within your organization, can really see and be given an opportunity. Succession planning, again, we're going to talk a little bit about that further on and the difference between succession planning and talent mobility, but understanding that succession planning isn't just kind of replacing the CEO, and you'll hear us talk about that in a bit. And then aligning rewards, right? Aligning rewards with individual, team, and usually, company goals that are overriding processes. But there's a bit more, Stephen, and that's, some of the factors that you'll talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So here are just a few key factors that influence progressive talent development. So underscore progressive here. And there's going to be a blend of some internal and external factors that need to be considered when you're moving towards more of a strategic direction with talent development. The first one, not just myself, I know everyone does here at ThinkWise too, but the movement away from traditional performance reviews And maybe that goes back to the Peter Principle.
Yep.
Performance reviews in the traditional sense has become the hammer in the Peter Principle. And it's just going to be used to death, to the point that death is already happening everywhere, right? Tongue-in-cheek a little bit. And people are expecting real-time feedback versus the annual review. And to say, well, we do annual reviews, quote unquote, twice a year is not changing anything. It just means you do the same thing twice. So mentally ill there in some business practices doesn't mean you're actually getting better. I mean, when you really think about real-time feedback, I joke with folks here at the office about Amazon Prime. My phone's going to buzz me probably later, letting me know right away that something is at my doorstep. Amazon doesn't wait for FedEx to tell me that. They take care of it. I'm used to the Zeitgeist, right? That's the German, the things that are just going on right now, what's happening. I expect my phone to tell me a lot of things that I don't know that I want to know yet. It just tells me what's happening. And that, quite frankly, either companies need to wake up and figure out what real-time feedback looks like, or they're just going to be bullied into the technology that's around them and moving in that direction. There's going to be a point in time that my watch is going to tell the airport here in Grand Rapids that I've walked by a billboard, and it's going to change to things that I like.
Yep.
That's real-time feedback.
Yep.
Right? So organizations are going to fail, and it's right in front of us to watch, and that's going to be unfortunate if they don't pick up the pace there. Another thing that's happening that's external are different generations happening in the workplace. So you have different career development expectations for a multitude of generations, and that's making businesses look at different realities, right? There's no such thing as one. And the other one is businesses may term it as higher turnover in the organization. The rest of us are going to see it as a career journey, right? And it's not being a spin doctor here. It's just that the realities are people stick, 1 to 3 years in most, especially large organizations, because they're looking for the next journey, because their company doesn't have a spot for their next journey, right? Their company is so rigid, they don't have talent mobility where, hey, I want to develop X, project development skill, so I'd like to move into another area of the business. And then you're going to get with, well, you have to apply. What you have on paper doesn't look like our KSAs that we need in that role. Yeah, you just told the person to leave. Right. Yeah, it's pretty troubling. The third one is access to content, and that to me that brings up YouTube like all over the place, which is also a disruptor that's everywhere. Access to content, you're going to have problems, trying to implement a 70-20-10 rule, quote unquote. One, it's not a real rule; it's a paradigm, right? So 70-20-10 is about what's the responsibility of me as an employee, as the learner, versus my boss, versus the external environment where I may go for conferences and skill building workshops and things like that. 70-20-10 has such a hard time being adopted in the business because the business doesn't know what to do with it.
Right.
It's a great paradigm. There's nothing wrong with it. The problem is now with the disruptors coming in, like YouTube. I'm not waiting for my company to tell me what I can learn. I'm just going to go find it. And guess what? YouTube is going to not only outpace a business on how much content it can put out there, it's going to potentially destroy the learning management, I think, industry.
Right.
Why wait for something on ethics for a business to tell me what ethics looks like in my business when I can type it into YouTube and watch, hours of TEDx,
right,
and much more entertaining.
Anybody, right?
Yeah, much more entertaining and done in 3 minutes,
right,
versus 8 hours. So, I think employees, bottom line here, are going to take ownership of what they want in their hands and go with it. And I think businesses either need to learn to embrace it or suffer.
Yep. Yeah, I just a quick thing on that particular, those factors. At the risk of maybe sounding too big picture, one of the great takeaways for this particular group in this webinar is to really look at some of those 4 bullet points and how they influence your organization. Because, again, the days of a performance review, highlighting a need to go to a 2-day offsite facilitated by, some outside third-party vendor that's going to give you some repackaged leadership bullet points over 3 days and you're hoping without any reinforcement that they kind of take root in your organization. Hopefully no one on this call is thinking that that's an okay strategy,
Right.
because in today's world, with access to content, with the desires of the workforce to elevate their game in life and how that connects to the workplace, that has to be taken into account in how you develop your talent within your organization.
Yeah, when you really boil it down, that's the brilliance of the internet.
Yeah, right. That is the brilliance of the internet.
It's here and it's now.
Yeah.
Right. So welcome to our first poll, right, for today. So here what we have is we threw up a pretty good question, I think, for everyone to consider. We're going to take your answers here in just a second, and then Bill and I will take a look and see how some of the reactions to the first poll go. And it's, what are the workplace disruptors that are most impacting your people at your organization, or the folks that you try to impact? So whether you're in HR, outside of HR, consultant, it doesn't matter. What are the disruptors that are most impacting the folks you work with? So we have 5 options here, guys. It's generational differences, technology changes, are they progressive processes creating confusion, right? Not everyone knows exactly how Lean Six Sigma is supposed to impact things. Or are they different career expectations of staff that are just being disruptive in your workplace? Or are you facing some data challenges, right? We all have this, I don't know, we just get inundated with data, right? And to the point where it's like, I don't know what to focus on. And am I wrong by just choosing one?
Right.
You know, it can be pretty symptomatic of just being paralyzed with so much information.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Mentality, right? We got to do something, so let's grab something. And
well, I guess it's all right. So let's just just grab a hold of some piece of data and make a change.
Right.
And the problem with just grabbing something, or like you said, that Nike slogan of "Just Do It," is that those are dials and they relate to other things. So you can impact 10 other things by messing with one with no intention of doing so. So you do have to be pretty careful on what you're doing. So
let's pose this. Great. Interesting feedback. Can we pull that up on the screen, Taha? And here we go. This is where we are. The poll's actually still live. But the influence of technology, Steve, kind of a runaway, winner, so to speak, on this. We can go ahead and end it and close it out.
60% of the folks having technology changes as their major disruptor. Yeah. And that question is posed pretty generally, Bill.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about just HR technology. There's all sorts of technology out there, from project management to finance, to just how do you take customers, right, at intake, to call center kind of technology changes. Right. And HR, right? You have benefits, vacation, rewards, recognition, hiring process, performance needs. There are a lot of technology challenges just in HR, right? There were 6 things right there. So yeah, I mean, Bill, I mean, what's something here that's really kind of jumping out?
The technology one certainly, but I would also go to number 2 there, which is the career expectations of staff, and we kind of highlighted that a little bit in some of the slides. So maybe not coincidentally, it's a part of the poll question, but that conversation and how that conversation works within an organization engages that particular employee, but also provides the organization with a great set of data to be able to facilitate that career and those expectations and the development behind that is a powerful piece of data for organizations to consider.
Sure. I mean, career expectations run the gamut from one day I want to be a leader here to today I'm in the call center, but I'd like to learn how to code. Mm-hmm. Right? And the business is faced with that as a challenge if they choose to accept that as a challenge of, this is a top performer, we would like to invest in them. How do we invest in them in the right way that makes sense for not only the employee in this coding aspiration, but also helps us as an organization. And that's the height of where people and your business strategy kind of meet. Yep. So those are 2 interesting ones, right? Yep. It's the technology challenges, and because that's how you manage your business as far as a process. Right. And then the aspirational challenges that people present to business. So that's great, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks for everybody to or for participating in that, and yeah, let's keep on trucking.
Yeah, so this is a great quote on the next slide, and I'll let you guys go ahead and read that. I don't need to drone on about a quote, but it's important. I think what it does really say to me is the importance of aligning people to your strategy and delivering the principles of the organization. People do need to be satisfied with the work they're doing and the surrounding environment, just to name a few things, right? So you need to allow people to deliver well above the expectations of the consumer, right? You need to wow them, and wowing even their boss, right? So what does that really mean, Steve, here? It's companies need to get out of their way at times. I think leaders tend to put their foot into something and meddle and not let people perform. And some of that performance is learning, right? Which means you trip, you fumble a little bit. But you still need to get out of the way, maybe help the person up, dust them off, and let them keep going.
Right.
So companies, I think, need to get out of the way at times and not step into a wonderful experience and dampen it for everyone that's involved. I think businesses, Bill, they owe it to themselves at times really to sit back and actually watch how work gets done, encourage people to think, create, and then let them deliver on that and let them be the recipient of that feedback. Because I think people are certainly smart enough to take that feedback and make changes, right? And no one wants to be a machine at work. No one wants to just sit there and hammer.
And typically that's what they're looking for as well, right? So you're not by that's an easy process to kind of visualize and you think, oh my gosh, what does that really mean within the organization? But that goes back to that performance feedback. That goes back to that developmental process that folks are looking at within that real-time feedback type of an approach, as opposed to, hey, let's catalog that for the annual review that's happening in November, and we had this project that was a deliverable in, whatever, March, and how does that actually drive progression within the organization?
And even worse, the boss turns around and says, do you remember that one time in March?
Right, yeah.
Oh, forget it. Yeah.
No, nobody.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how I got to the meeting, right? And you're asking me about how many months ago?
My institutional memory loss is ridiculous, right? So before we kind of dive into the back section of today's presentation, we'll spend just a few quick slides here, and we'll go to the next one. And again, we wouldn't really be doing our jobs if we weren't looking at data points that illustrate strategic talent development impacts on an organization. And there's a lot of information on this slide, but a couple of key components. The I4CP study on talent metrics, highly profitable businesses focus more on talent than their counterparts, right? And it gives, the key point of this, of course, is the three the data points that they use that you guys can take back within your own organizations to measure, right? Employee engagement, leadership, effectiveness, and management satisfaction, right? It's taking a pretty round view, right? Overall employee engagement, leadership effectiveness, depending on how you define that in your organization, you're getting some critical high-level feedback for the people kind of all the way up the hierarchy, so to speak, but also management satisfaction, right? A key component in the overall process of understanding a development strategy, because people identify with their boss, however you define what your boss is within the organization. So that's that key management satisfaction component. And then the second larger bullet point is really the strategic talent, the results there for paying attention with a good strategy, which again, we're going to get to this. What does this actually mean? The actionable components here in a couple of slides, but we're going to generate greater revenue per employee. We're going to have those lower turnover rates, and we're going to have the higher levels of employee engagement. I know we have some thoughts and comments about employee engagement and what it really means. Be careful of the kind of the Hallmark card version of employee engagement, right? That's kind of overused, kind of jump the shark, so to speak.
Right.
But really understand what employee engagement means to your organization and the data points you need to measure so it's relevant within your four walls.
Yeah, so a key takeaway for folks on this call with the bullets for employee engagement, leadership effectiveness, and management satisfaction, Bill, is that these are not necessarily HR metrics, right? And that may confuse folks. These are actually financial metrics.
Right.
So both HR and finance can sit together and agree on these three things and they're all correlation. So when employee engagement goes up, the finance group, they need to be able to see that their profitability went up. When when staff say their leaders are being effective and that increases year over year, profitability also increases.
Yep.
And then when managers say that they like their job, to keep it simple, over and over and over again, profitability goes up.
Right.
So those are really key financial, I think, metrics that all the stakeholders can grab a hold of, where HR can come in as experts and help manage that process.
Sure. Right. And then that's a subject for another day, right? Is how we're driving value through the people process, right? So we'll quickly go to the next slide and we'll look at, again, before we get into the actual building of the strategy, just some obstacles you guys need to keep in mind, right? We've broken them down, the traditional tactically versus strategically. So again, if you take away this presentation and you're using it as a lens in your own organization, you need to look at how we can overcome some of these obstacles within your organization tactically. We talked about it a little bit earlier, the access to content, how people learn, right? You want to make sure your talent development strategy isn't siloed, right? There's a tremendous amount of risk if you allow different processes in different departments, different locations, so on and so forth. That needs to be a cohesive message. Systems integration, Steve, you hit on a little bit. It's way too simplistic to put an LMS system in place and kind of cross your fingers.
Yeah. Way too expensive too.
And way too expensive. The accountability side, always critical, right? Evaluate, and the takeaway on that accountability side is be willing to evaluate the evaluators within your organization, right? So you keep a well-rounded view, right? Use 360 assessments, for example. So you get a really well-rounded view of the folks that are providing feedback all the way through your organization, because that story becomes way more valuable to your organization when you have that well-rounded view. And then KPIs, right? You have to have a clear handle on measurement. So actions based on facts and not speculation, right? Going back to maybe defeating some of the Peter Principle side of things.
Sure.
Strategically, just real quickly, creating a shared vision, way easier said than done. But agreement on the competencies that matter to an organization adds focus to your talent development strategy. And let me say that again, agreement on the competencies that matter. So you need buy-in all the way up and largely all the way down on the competencies that matter within an organization. And they have to link, which is that second bullet point, to organizational priorities. It can't be a flavor of the month. It must relentlessly tie to the future success of the organization. C-suite buy-in, we've touched on it. Leadership motives, understand that leaders come from everywhere and not everyone necessarily is a leader or even wants to be a leader, right? Which again makes it very important to understand that full picture of your talent pool with an organization. And just lastly, misalignment. If there's misalignment between employees' expectations and if there's a gap between the value proposition employees seek and what an organization provides, clearly you're going to have real troubles there, right? And again, avoid that just do it mentality there. Really think about how you can set up your strategy to be really effective and move the needle and not just kind of throw something at the wall and hope it sticks. So.
No. That's a bad spaghetti trick.
Right.
So, yeah, and as it relates to strategy, Bill, I think it's an important, stop at this point in the presentation to really talk about benchmarks, and some people talk about norming.
Yep.
And benchmarks are good, right? So I think it's important that when it comes to strategy and developing employees, though, you need to be careful. It's too easy to turn into a copycat organization because someone else is doing something and adopt whatever it is they do, right? So leaders rely on benchmark data all the time, and like I said, there's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
Know the motivation for peering into the life of another business. Why are you doing it?
Right.
Because that's going to inform what you get out of it. If you're going over there to, I don't hesitate to say the word steal, what someone else is doing because Target is doing something and you want to be a big box retailer, or a healthcare organization, doesn't mean you go out and do the same thing, right? It's just going to kill you. Right. So seeing how you compare is one thing is the point, but adopting their practices just because you think it's similar is going to be detrimental, right? So what works at Google, ineffective at Microsoft, and would just kill Amazon. Right. So be careful, like I said, what the motivation is for looking at benchmark data.
Yeah. I love that conversation there on norming and a critical point, and like you said, it's a good reminder, right? As you're taking information, you're gathering your takeaways from today.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind. So let's, kind of the final section. Steve, you want to kind of start with what, again, we'll dive back into that talent development strategy?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's kind of 5 main points that are on your screen. So let's dive into it a little bit on how talent development can be taken from strategy to action a little bit deeper. And we're not confusing anyone. In the next 15 minutes, you can't take strategy into action, but we're just going to outline kind of a few key points here. So in general, talent strategy is something that aligns and integrates people across multiple key initiatives across the business, right? Mm-hmm. And they certainly include hiring, right? That's what many people consider the front-end engine. Talent development, which is, to a large extent is internal coaching. You can have some external stuff, but some of the research has said external kind of learning has almost a single-digit percentage increase in performance. Yeah. So we're very cautious of kind of exercising how great that may be. The engagement of staff, and we certainly will dive into that a bit more. Reward systems are important. And rather than saying succession planning, I call it pipeline management. Because I think pipeline management is inclusive of succession planning, but it also needs to include things like talent identification, key role identification, talent mobility, and also critical development opportunities. Taking your VP of Ops, right, yep, who needs better financial acumen, don't turn him into your CFO, but you may need to offshore him internally to another group to help learn and bridge some gaps, right? There's good mentors in that area of the business that are willing and can tolerate to the, they're good coaches, so to speak, and can help that individual. That individual is not going to be an expert through that experience, but competent is a good way to put it.
Is the key word there, yeah. And being willing to take that risk and understand the value of that investment within your organization is key, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it does take time, and it includes other people. Like you said, when you turn one dial, it monkeys with other settings, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why that strategic approach is so important to your organization.
Yeah. So a key graphic that's on your screen probably is not the word cloud in the paper airplane, but it has to do with the plan, expectations, and solution side of things, because this is how you drive great strategy, and this helps with at least an outline of a process, right? It's planning helps you understand how the organization's strategy impacts the business. Expectations are things like there are no silos.
Right.
People need to communicate across organizations. Finance shouldn't be shut off from HR, which shouldn't be shut off from ops or shut off, say, from sales. Right. There needs to be a flow of information and what people need, what they do, and what they want, and how they can deliver. And then the solution side of things, they have to be owned and seamless. The ownership really is management.
Yeah.
HR comes in as the strategic folks that understand process around people, but it needs to be owned by people. So like a great hiring plan doesn't start with recruiting great. A hiring plan really starts from looking inside. How do you attract top-level candidates? First, you look at what the real job looks like in depth, right? And who those A players are kind of in that role, and studying what they do at work, learning about their performance, how they do it, what they do, and what the incentives are that make sense, right? Now you can go higher once you collect that kind of information. Right? It'd be silly to say that's what a job analysis does. It doesn't.
Right.
Job analysis doesn't accomplish that really, I think, at all. And that's where HR needs to help process this information with other groups outside of HR, not just buy benchmark data and say, this is what our industry does in accounting, therefore this is the type of accountant we should hire. That's where you're going to fail.
Widen the lens when you're looking at your process. Widen that lens when you're looking at the process. So we'll dive into some of those five or six bullet points that Steve specifically mentioned here, right? And we'll give you some takeaways specific to those. So if we look at talent development strategy and we look at hiring, right? The 4 bullet points that we talk about focusing on, that competency measurement, right? Common competency measurement, regardless of role. it can be incredibly powerful, right? And understand the value of balancing knowledge, skills, and ability assessment to, the soft skills and the business competencies, that mission, vision, and value fit measurement that becomes incredibly powerful to building that culture, staying true to the culture within your organization. Recruiters as a center of excellence. We talked about how we would get back to this today, and we just really wanted to highlight that, right? We see it all the time in organizations, especially organizations of size, of course, where there's a recruiting department, but this idea that recruiters or recruiting is kind of an entry-level role at an organization, and if you do a nice job, maybe, hey, we'll bump you up, a little higher on the hierarchy or something like that. It's fine that it can be a stepping stone position within your organization, but set appropriate expectations, right? Make the recruiting department a center of excellence. And even if you're not large enough to have a recruiting department, think about how that recruiting process and that message you have out there in the marketplace is driving the fit conversation that's critical to building that culture and bringing in those folks that are going to help drive your organization forward, which of course takes you to bullet point 3, which is recruiting for fit, right? Not just achievement. Again, a little jibe at the Peter principle there, looking at where you want to go versus where you are now, right? Which is that last bullet point being future focused. So you can see how all 4 of those bullet points are really woven in to a proper hiring strategy, right? Of course, there's a tactical side of it that's important, but strategically, if you can link those 4, you're really going to have a powerful talent development strategy that starts with hiring.
Yeah, and recruiting
includes, I should say, hiring. Includes hiring, because that doesn't start there.
So, and then an important thing to go back on is that recruiting for fit. Something to keep in mind. It's not about fit like, I leave and who can replace me today. It's who should replace me moving forward.
Right.
And a company who doesn't have, say, a 1 to 3 year strategy of what this organization needs, that's where hiring fails constantly. Yeah. Because all you're doing is just churning.
Right. You're filling you're the boy putting his fingers in the dam, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking about how can we build a better dam, right? Easy visualization.
Or do we need the dam anymore?
Exactly. So talent development strategy. This slide kind of cracks me up because we say talent development strategy and then we say talent development, but there's some critical takeaways here, right? In essence, you want to be able to align talent development practices to that of the strategy of the business, right? When you can align individual development to business imperatives, it's a win-win. So sure, talent development really starts by being an attractive place to work, but it needs to come to life, and your staff need to feel it as well while they're at work. So developing internal talent pools allow you to grow your people while you grow your business. And again, this is a kind of a reciprocal relationship on both sides. So, again, that career pathing is communication about what it looks like, to move forward in an organization, right? That's a clearly defined strategy and path within the organization. And then the developmental opportunities that are communicated out in order to help achieve those career pathways, and you're identifying those folks regardless of role and responsibility, and understanding their skill set, so that becomes real powerful. Observe volunteer work, right? Kind of an interesting one that we wanted to put out there because, again, it's that bridge that's so critical to personal values and how they link to business values and vice versa there. Team development, really critical, right? How do we collaborate versus how do I collaborate? Understanding that very clearly within your organization, using tools to help illuminate how teamwork actually works within your organization can be a very powerful data points for that talent development strategy. And then again, talent mobility, which we've touched on a bunch.
Yes.
This idea that knowledge sharing, that knowledge gaining, it doesn't necessarily mean, hey, we're just looking to replace the CEO here. It's a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
So engagement, we said we'd get to this. It's a bit of an eye chart here, but what we really wanted to lock in here is when we talk about engagement, the data illustrates that the most common elements measured in an organization are communication and results focused, right? But overwhelmingly. So engagement, what it means, can so often be broken down to, does the organization communicate well, and is it focused on results? And of course, you have to overlay that to the role and responsibility and the position and department and the location and all that,
Right.
so on and so forth, across your organization. But if you can focus on two key data points to define engagement within your organization, traditionally speaking, that you're going to be moving in a direction your employees want you to move, which is, are we talking, and is what I'm doing and is the organization focused on moving forward?
Right.
Right. We're going to be successful if we can say yes to those two questions.
Yeah, and ThinkWise, we've been around since 2007. One thing that we're able to do as a solution provider, Bill, is able to take a look at the data, right? So we're able to look at whether it's an individual contributor, a midline leader, or the C-suite. It doesn't matter where they sit, nor does it matter the industry.
Right.
Those are the only two things that really pop out, letting at least us here at ThinkWise know that those are the two key differentiators for businesses to be successful, and what they need to focus on is how clear they're communicating on a two-way street, and are they achieving in a direction towards results, and then that becomes a feedback loop. So those two key things, Bill, I think you hit on where, as far as the clarity of that communication and being kind of results focused, they're absolutely crucial, and not just for engagement.
Right.
Yeah. Good
So
point.
one final poll here. I think, Steve, you're going to set this up.
Yeah. So this is our last poll. So how do you define engagement at your business? Are people generally happy? You may or may not use surveys to get this, and you may be more in the subjective of how you get these, but that's fine. Some people may get emojis, Bill, and get smiley faces, right? Yep. So are people generally happy? Do staff have friends at work? Is that an indicator? Putting in the extra effort, that's interesting on how that gets measured. People keep showing up to work, right? Therefore, they must be engaged, right? And sure. To no major complaints about the workplace, therefore, everything must be good, right? So, I mean, we don't pick these things out of a hat. These are things that get used time and time and time again as questions related to tapping into the audience, that is your staff, to figure out engagement. So we just like to see how you guys in the audience of the webinar, how you guys are seeing your workplace engagement measurement.
Yeah. So go ahead and we know there are a bunch of you out there, so don't be shy in clicking away here. We'll leave it open for a bit longer. So far, really only two showing up, kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The extra effort and the generally happy.
Yeah, so let's just take maybe 15, 20 seconds left. So because this may not change.
Yeah.
I mean, Bill, I think those two are kind of interesting. I mean, putting in the extra effort is I don't know, Bill. I mean, maybe in a company of three, you can tell that. I mean, you see that, you feel that, you can live that. But in a company of 20,000, it's impossible.
Right.
So how do you measure those kinds of things? Can a leader with a team of 4 people measure that? Sure. Yeah, subjectively, yeah. But how does that information get rolled up to where the C-suite can really know who's engaged and who's not? That is such a hard thing to do. And that's not a stab at engagement. That's really a stab at the process that's not really properly in place for people to get at that information. And the general happiness is another one, right? I mean, if everyone on the call is from the United States, I mean, the pursuit of happiness is kind of written into our social contract, right? I think the psychologist in me says happiness is almost unachievable, right? And not to be all about gloom here, but the best thing you can probably do is be content, so you can manage those few moments in life, right? I don't mean few, I mean as like 2 or anything, but those few moments in life where you are happy. Right, because that's such a highly kind of elated state you're going to be in. Being content is far better of an indicator than happiness, so to speak.
Yeah. So it's just interesting. We kind of built this poll out on purpose, and there's a fair amount of subjectivity in this poll. Like if you look at all the answer options, right, guys? And those of you on the call, I mean, there was kind of a reason for that. But I think what's illustrated again is the two that were most responded to, at least in our short poll. There's a lot of subjectivity to it, right? And that I just think that's fascinating and what engagement really means within the organization. So, you guys, we need to keep an eye on the clock, and we just have a couple of more quick things to share, and then we want to wrap it up with a powerful slide about HR's role. So, again, of the 5 points, talent development strategy, and again, we'll provide you these slides so you really have an opportunity to dive into this, but your reward system has to be tied into that MMV, and that mission, vision, and value, that's critical. You want to look at frequency of reward system. You know, there's a lot to be said. There are plenty of articles online about the value of a pat on the back, the value of a thank you when you're thinking of rewards. But again, if you're just doing that to do it, and you're not tying it into ABCs, those attitude, behaviors, contributions, we kind of touched on that approach early, right? If you're not doing that when you're using and designing your reward system, now you've got misalignment, and as you've heard kind of multiple times in this, misalignment is certainly rough on results. And then lastly, pipeline management. I'm glad this is kind of last because we have kind of talked about this a fair amount throughout. Pipeline management includes succession management, but it's more encompassing. You know, look at, you know, hiring needs, of course, and key or critical roles outside of leadership. Remember that phrase, disruptors can come from anywhere, right? And they do come from anywhere in today's world, and embrace that as an opportunity within your organization, as opposed to, you know, kind of staying within the walls of what traditional kind of pipeline management or succession planning looks like, right? And that risk alone within your organization can help build on that culture and build on those results that are critical. So let's finish it up, Steve. Go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. So in essence, you know, how can HR help? And I think it's important for HR, you know, how you can support leadership in your organization is going to be important as it relates to talent strategy. So remember these 5 key things. So leaders are role models, and that's important, right? They're essentially just like coaches.
Yep.
Whether you're a fan of Coach K or Bill Belichick, they're role models, right? It is no different. You know, I understand sports is often the cliche at times, but it's a cliche for a reason.
Right.
Right. So, and also celebrate the results, but also understand that the learning occurs at any point in time, and that includes failures. Pick people up. Yep. And sometimes it's important to have a powwow with a group to understand those failures, not in the sense of just how to smooth them out later, but just to understand the journey and the difficulty in getting the results, right? Sometimes it's required that, you know, I fall down in order to get the win.
Right.
Right? Did it feel good? Absolutely not. But it feels good when people pick me up and want to talk about it. Right. Leaders coach employees. That is important, and you can't teach that. Right? You can set the expectation, and you can even try to provide incentives, but if your leaders are not coaching your people, you don't have the right leaders. You have technical experts. And while they're absolutely a necessity and should make up 80 to 90% of your organization, they're not your leaders. Yeah. And then the mission, vision, and values need to be understood as everyday responsibilities. When they are written to be so abstract, delete them. Just delete.
Yep.
They're aspirational in a sense. They're abstract like a painting. Write them to where they're actionable every day by everyone. And then lastly, you know, problems are opportunities. They are. And you need to understand that those problems should be looked at as challenges, and those challenges can make everyone better. They're all teaching moments. And so be essentially a creative problem solver.
Well, Steve, thank you. Really, that's the final slide, and as far as the presentation itself, does it look like we have a few questions we want to get to, Steve? Here?
Yeah, so we have someone asking about people aligning the review, which I'll assume is the performance review and pay for as far as performance. Do I see it? Yeah. However, I can tell you what the research says, and that's that they don't make any sense, like almost zero, as far as pay and or performance correlating with each other. They don't, because what research will say in an organization that the rates of a pay increase as it relates to people performing better or getting fired is the same.
Is the same, right?
So if people get the pay increase but get fired, and people get a pay increase and get a promotion or a larger bonus, and they're almost equivalent, pay for performance is one of the worst things you can do inside of an organization as a general principle. Can it work? Sure. Have I seen it work? Ineffectively.
Yeah.
Yeah, in pockets. But as a large organizational strategy, this is how we do it as a whole. Terrible idea. Can it work with certain roles? Possibly.
Yeah. And that's why that's at one of the roots of why you see the articles online about Accenture going away from performance reviews and so on and so forth, right? I mean,
yeah,
absolutely.
Accenture, Deloitte, Aon, you name it.
Apple did it years ago,
Yeah.
yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so we're finished here today, and we really appreciate it. Look for some follow-up for ThinkWise. We appreciate, or from ThinkWise, we appreciate you folks joining us today, and certainly have a great Wednesday. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. Thank you, too. And thanks, everyone, for joining us this morning. It was a great Wednesday webinar, and we really appreciate you guys coming along. Take care, everyone.